The room was silent, except for the low hum of the holographic projector. Rows of alien students sat stiffly in their seats, their eyes fixed on the towering figure at the front. The instructor, a massive reptilian creature with scales that shimmered like molten metal, paced slowly, his claws clicking against the floor. His voice was deep, almost a growl, as he addressed the class. "Welcome to Extreme Survival 101, he said, his yellow eyes scanning the room. "This is not a class for the weak. This is where the galaxy's toughest species prove their worth. Only the strongest will survive." At the back of the room, a small group of humans exchanged nervous glances. They didn't belong here. They knew it. Everyone knew it. Earth was a backwater planet, a death world, in galactic terms, but not in a good way. To the rest of the universe, humans were fragile, primitive, and utterly out of place in a class designed for the galaxy's elite. One of the humans, a young man with dark hair and a determined expression, clenched his fists under the table. He had always been told humans were weak, that they could never compete with the advanced species of the galaxy. But he didn't believe it. None of them did. The instructor stopped pacing and turned to face the class. "Before we begin, let me make one thing clear," he said, his gaze lingering on the humans. "This class is not for those who rely on luck or pity. It is for those who have earned their place through strength, skill, and survival. If you cannot keep up, you will not survive. And if you cannot survive, you do not belong here." The room erupted in murmurs as the alien students glanced at the humans, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. The young man felt his face grow hot, but he didn't look away. He met the instructor's gaze head-on, his jaw set. The instructor smirked, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin." The holographic projector flickered to life, displaying a massive, swirling planet covered in dense jungles and towering mountains. The instructor gestured to the image. "Your first challenge will take place here, on Zorith 7. A jungle planet with a toxic atmosphere, deadly predators, and terrain that will test even the strongest among you. You will be dropped onto the surface with nothing but your wits and your will to survive. The goal is simple: make it to the extraction point alive." The room fell silent as the students absorbed the information. The young man felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. He glanced at his fellow humans, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and out of their depth. But they had one thing the others didn't: they were survivors. As the instructor continued to explain the rules, the young man's mind raced. He thought of Earth, of the storms that could level cities, the predators that could tear a man apart, the deserts and mountains that had claimed countless lives. Earth was a death world, but it was their death world. And if they could survive there, they could survive anywhere. The instructor's voice cut through his thoughts. "You have 1 hour to prepare. Use it wisely." The students began to file out of the room, their voices buzzing with excitement and anxiety. The humans stayed behind, huddled together in a corner. The young man looked at his companions, his eyes burning with determination. "We can do this," he said, his voice steady. "We've survived worse. We just have to stick together and trust each other." The others nodded, their fear giving way to resolve. They didn't have advanced technology or superhuman strength, but they had something the others didn't: the will to survive. And that, they knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. As they left the room and headed for the preparation area, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder and caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure disappearing into the crowd. A shiver ran down his spine, but he pushed the thought aside. They had bigger problems to worry about. The jungle planet awaited, and with it, the first test of their survival. The humans were the underdogs, the outsiders, the ones no one believed in. But they were ready to prove everyone wrong. The shuttle doors hissed open, and a wave of humid, toxic air rushed in. The young man stepped out first, his boots sinking into the thick, purple moss that covered the ground. The jungle stretched out before him, a tangled mass of towering trees with glowing vines and strange, bioluminescent plants. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Behind him, the other humans followed, their faces pale but determined. They had been given no tools, no weapons, and no supplies, just the clothes on their backs and their wits. The instructor's voice echoed in their minds, "Survive. That is all." The shuttle doors slammed shut, and the craft lifted off, leaving them alone in the jungle. The young man took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He turned to the group, his voice calm but firm. "We need to stick together," he said. "This place is dangerous, but we've faced worse. Remember what we've been through back home. We can do this." The others nodded, their eyes scanning the jungle for threats. One of them, a woman with short hair and a scar running down her arm, stepped forward. "First things first," she said. "We need shelter. That air doesn't smell right, and I don't want to find out what it does to our lungs." The young man agreed. They moved quickly, using their knowledge of Earth's jungles to guide them. They found a large tree with thick, overlapping roots and began to dig out a small hollow beneath it. The ground was soft and wet, making the work easier, but the air was heavy and hard to breathe. As they worked, the young man kept an eye on their surroundings. The jungle was alive with movement, shadows flitting between the trees, the rustle of leaves, the occasional screech of a predator. He felt a prickle of unease but pushed it aside. They didn't have time to be afraid. Once the shelter was ready, they huddled inside, using the roots as cover. The woman pulled a small device from her pocket, a makeshift filter she had cobbled together from scraps back at the academy. She handed it to the young man. "It's not much," she said, "but it should help with the air." He nodded, grateful. They took turns using the filter, each of them feeling a little stronger as the clean air filled their lungs. Outside, the jungle grew darker, the glowing vines casting an eerie light over the landscape. As night fell, the predators came out. The humans could hear them moving through the trees, their low growls sending shivers down their spines. The young man peered out from their shelter, his heart pounding. He saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him, and for a moment, he froze. But then he remembered where he was. This was just another jungle, another predator. He had faced worse on Earth. He grabbed a sharp stick from the ground and held it tightly, ready to defend his group if necessary. The creature lunged, its massive jaws snapping at the air. The young man swung the stick, hitting the creature in the side. It let out a roar and retreated into the shadows, but he knew it would be back. The night passed slowly, each moment filled with tension and fear. But the humans held their ground, using their wits and teamwork to stay alive. By morning, they were exhausted but unharmed. As the sun rose, casting a faint light through the dense canopy, the young man stepped out of the shelter and looked around. The jungle was still dangerous, but they had survived the first night. They had proven that they could adapt, that they could overcome. But as he turned to speak to the others, he noticed something strange. A small, metallic object was lying on the ground a few feet away. He picked it up, his brow furrowing. It was a tracking device, but it wasn't one of theirs. Before he could say anything, a voice crackled in his ear. It was faint, almost a whisper, but he could make out the words. "You're being watched. Be careful." He spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The jungle was silent, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. The young man clenched the tracking device in his hand, his mind racing. They weren't alone. Someone, or something, was watching them. And whatever it was, it had its own agenda. The humans moved cautiously through the jungle, their senses on high alert. The young man led the way, the tracking device still clutched in his hand. He hadn't told the others about the voice yet, he wasn't sure if it was real or just his imagination. But the device was proof that someone was watching them, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being tested in ways they didn't understand. As they walked, the woman with the scarred arm fell into step beside him. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice low. "We can't just wander around aimlessly." The young man glanced at her. "We need to find water first," he said. "Then food. If we're going to survive, we need to think like we're back on Earth. Use what we know." She nodded, her eyes scanning the jungle. "Back home, water would be in the lowlands," she said. "But this place, it's different. Everything's different." "Not everything," he replied. "Predators still hunt. Plants still grow. We just have to adapt." As they pressed on, the young man's mind drifted back to Earth. He remembered the storms that would sweep across the plains, tearing apart anything in their path. He remembered the deserts, where water was scarce and the sun burned everything to ash. And he remembered the jungles, dense and unforgiving, where every step could be your last. Earth was a death world, but it had taught them how to survive. It had taught them to be resourceful, to think on their feet, to rely on each other. And now, as they faced the challenges of Zorith 7, those lessons were more valuable than ever. The group reached a small clearing, and the young man held up a hand to signal them to stop. In the center of the clearing was a pool of water, its surface shimmering in the faint light. But something about it felt off. The water was too still, too quiet. "Be careful," he whispered. "It could be a trap." They approached the pool cautiously, their eyes scanning the area for signs of danger. As they drew closer, the young man noticed something strange, a faint ripple in the water, as if something was moving just beneath the surface. Before he could react, a creature burst out of the water, its long, slimy body thrashing wildly. The humans scattered, dodging the creature's snapping jaws. The young man grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature, hitting it in the side. It let out a gurgling roar and retreated back into the pool. The group regrouped, their hearts pounding. "What was that?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. "A predator," the young man replied. "But we scared it off. We just have to be smarter than it." They found a way to collect water without getting too close to the pool, using leaves and hollowed-out vines to create makeshift containers. As they worked, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, his eyes searching the shadows, but he saw nothing. Later, as they rested in a small cave they had found, the young man finally told the others about the voice and the tracking device. They listened in silence, their faces grim. "So someone's watching us," the woman said. "But who? And why?" "I don't know," the young man admitted. "But I think we're being tested. Not just by the jungle, but by whoever's behind this." As they talked, one of the others noticed something strange on the cave wall. It was a series of symbols, carved into the rock. They looked ancient, but there was something familiar about them. The young man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the symbols. This isn't random," he said. "It's a map." The others gathered around, their curiosity piqued. The map showed the jungle, with a path leading to a hidden location deep in the heart of the planet. At the end of the path was a single symbol, a circle with a line through it. "What does it mean?" one of them asked. "I don't know," the young man replied. "But I think we need to find out." As they prepared to leave the cave, the young man felt a surge of determination. They were being tested, but they were also being given a chance to prove that they were more than just survivors. They were fighters. And they were ready to face whatever came next. The humans followed the map carved into the cave wall, moving deeper into the jungle. The path was treacherous, with thick vines and hidden pitfalls, but they pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and determination. The young man led the way, his eyes scanning the symbols on the map as they went. As they walked, the woman with the scarred arm spoke up. "Do you think this map was left for us?" she asked. "Or are we just lucky?" The young man shook his head. "I don't believe in luck," he said. "Someone wanted us to find this. Maybe it's the same person who left the tracking device." The group fell silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier with every step. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Whatever was waiting for them at the end of the path, they needed to see it for themselves. After hours of walking, they reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone structure, covered in moss and vines. It looked ancient, but there was something about it that felt alive. The young man approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he noticed more symbols carved into the stone. These were different from the ones on the map, more intricate, more deliberate. He traced them with his fingers, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of them. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet began to vibrate. The others stumbled back, their eyes wide with fear. The young man held his ground, his eyes fixed on the stone structure. Slowly, a hidden door began to open, revealing a dark passageway. "What is this place?" one of the humans whispered. "I don't know," the young man replied. "But we're about to find out." They stepped inside, the air growing colder as they descended into the darkness. The passageway was narrow, the walls lined with more symbols. As they walked, the young man noticed something strange. The symbols seemed to tell a story. A story of war, of exploitation, of a galaxy ruled by fear. At the end of the passageway, they found a small chamber. In the center of the chamber was a holographic projector, its light flickering weakly. The young man approached it, his heart racing. As he activated the projector, a hologram sprang to life, a figure cloaked in shadows, their face hidden. "If you are seeing this," the figure said, their voice low and urgent, "it means you have proven yourselves worthy. The Empire has lied to you. This class is not about survival, it is about control. They seek to identify the strongest species, not to teach them, but to enslave them. You must fight back. You must resist." The hologram flickered and faded, leaving the humans in stunned silence. The young man clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had suspected something was wrong, but this was worse than he had imagined. "What do we do now?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. The young man turned to her, his eyes burning with determination. "We keep going," he said. "We finish this class, but we do it on our terms. We show them that we're not just survivors, we're fighters. And we won't be controlled." As they left the chamber and made their way back to the surface, the young man felt a surge of resolve. They were being tested, but they were also being given a chance to expose the Empire's lies and fight for their freedom. But as they stepped back into the jungle, they were met with a new challenge. The air had grown colder, the sky darkening with storm clouds. In the distance, they could see the jungle giving way to a frozen wasteland, its icy peaks glinting in the faint light. The young man took a deep breath, his breath visible in the cold air. "This isn't over," he said. "Not yet." The jungle gave way to a vast, frozen expanse, the ground covered in a thick layer of ice and snow. The humans stood at the edge of the wasteland, their breath visible in the freezing air. The transition was abrupt, as if the planet itself was designed to test their limits. The young man shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around him. "This is the next challenge," he said, his voice steady despite the cold. "We need to find shelter and warmth, or we won't last long." The group nodded, their faces pale but determined. They had survived the jungle, but this was a different kind of danger, one that required a different kind of strength. As they stepped onto the icy terrain, the wind howled around them, biting at their exposed skin. The woman with the scarred arm pointed to a distant ridge. "There," she said. "We might find cover there." They moved carefully, their boots crunching in the snow. The ground was slippery, and the cold seeped into their bones with every step. But they pressed on, their determination unwavering. As they climbed the ridge, the young man noticed something strange, a faint glow coming from a crevice in the ice. He motioned for the others to stop and approached cautiously. Peering inside, he saw a small, hidden cave, its walls lined with glowing crystals. "In here," he called, his voice barely audible over the wind. The group hurried inside, grateful for the shelter. The crystals provided a faint warmth, and the cave was large enough for them to rest. As they huddled together, the young man noticed something else, a small device, similar to the tracking device they had found earlier, lying on the ground. He picked it up, his brow furrowing. Before he could examine it, a voice crackled in his ear, the same voice he had heard before. "You're getting closer," the voice said. "But the Empire is watching. Be careful." The young man spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the cave was empty. The others looked at him, their faces filled with concern. "What is it?" the woman asked. He hesitated, then handed her the device. "Someone's helping us," he said. "But I don't know who, or why." As they rested, the young man's mind raced. The Empire's plans were becoming clearer, but so were the risks. They were being tested, not just for survival, but for something bigger. And whoever was helping them, the mysterious observer, was taking a huge risk. When the storm outside began to die down, the group prepared to move on. The young man took one last look at the glowing crystals, their light flickering like a warning. He knew the frozen wasteland was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. As they stepped back into the cold, the young man felt a surge of determination. They had survived the jungle, and they would survive this. But more than that, they would expose the Empire's lies and fight for their freedom. But as they walked, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The young man froze, his eyes scanning the icy landscape. In the distance, he saw something moving, a massive creature, its body covered in thick fur and its eyes glowing like embers. "Run!" he shouted. The group sprinted across the ice, the creature hot on their heels. The young man's heart pounded as he ran, his mind racing. They couldn't outrun the creature, but maybe they could outsmart it. As they reached a narrow crevasse, the young man turned to the others. "Jump!" he yelled. They leaped across the gap, the creature skidding to a halt at the edge. It let out a roar of frustration, its breath freezing in the air. The humans collapsed on the other side, their chests heaving. The young man looked back at the creature, his eyes narrowing. "We're not just survivors," he muttered. "We're fighters." As they pressed on, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Empire was testing them, but so was someone else. And whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain, they wouldn't go down without a fight. The frozen wasteland gave way to a blistering desert, the sun blazing overhead like a fiery furnace. The humans stumbled into the sand, their bodies still shivering from the cold, now assaulted by the oppressive heat. The transition was jarring, as if the planet itself was designed to break them. The young man shielded his eyes from the sun, his throat already dry. "This is the next challenge," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need water, or we won't last an hour." The group nodded, their faces flushed and sweaty. They had survived the jungle and the frozen wasteland, but this was a new kind of hell. The sand stretched out in every direction, endless and unforgiving. As they trudged through the desert, the young man noticed something strange, a faint shimmer in the distance. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. "There," he said, pointing. "It might be water." The group quickened their pace, their hope renewed. But as they drew closer, the shimmer disappeared, revealing nothing but more sand. The young man cursed under his breath. It had been a mirage. The woman with the scarred arm wiped the sweat from her brow. "We need to find shade," she said. "If we don't cool down, we'll collapse." They searched for shelter, their movements sluggish in the heat. Finally, they found a rocky outcrop, its shadow providing a small respite from the sun. They huddled together, their bodies weak and dehydrated. As they rested, the young man noticed something carved into the rock, a series of symbols, similar to the ones they had seen before. He traced them with his fingers, his brow furrowing. This is another map," he said. The others gathered around, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and exhaustion. The map showed a path through the desert, leading to a hidden oasis. At the end of the path was a single symbol, a circle with a line through it, just like before. "We need to follow it," the young man said. "It's our only chance." The group pressed on, their steps slow and deliberate. The heat was unbearable, and their water was gone. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. The map was their only hope. As they walked, the young man's mind drifted back to earth. He remembered the deserts there, the endless stretches of sand and the relentless sun. He remembered how people had learned to survive in those conditions, using every resource they had. And he remembered the stories of those who hadn't made it, stories of courage and sacrifice. The thought gave him strength. They were survivors, but they were also fighters. And they wouldn't give up, no matter how hard the Empire tried to break them. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sand. The group was on the verge of collapse when they finally saw it, a small oasis, its water glinting in the fading light. They stumbled toward it, their bodies weak but their spirits renewed. As they drank from the oasis, the young man noticed something strange, a small, metallic object lying in the sand. He picked it up, his brow furrowing. It was another device, but this one was different. It had a message carved into it: "The Empire exploits the weak. Fight back." Before he could say anything, a voice crackled in his ear, the same voice he had heard before. "You're not alone," the voice said. "Others have suffered too. Find them. Unite them." The young man spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the desert was empty. The others looked at him, their faces filled with concern. "What is it?" the woman asked. He hesitated, then handed her the device. "Someone's helping us," he said. "And they're not the only ones who want to fight the Empire." As they rested by the oasis, the young man's mind raced. The Empire's plans were becoming clearer, but so were the risks. They were being tested, not just for survival, but for something bigger. And whoever was helping them, the mysterious observer, was taking a huge risk. When the sun rose again, the group prepared to move on. The young man took one last look at the oasis, its water shimmering like a mirage. He knew the desert was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. As they stepped back into the sand, the young man felt a surge of determination. They had survived the jungle, the frozen wasteland, and the desert. But more than that, they had uncovered the Empire's lies and found allies in the fight against it. But as they walked, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The young man froze, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, he saw something moving, a massive sandstorm, its winds howling like a beast. "Run," he shouted. The group sprinted across the sand, the storm hot on their heels. The young man's heart pounded as he ran, his mind racing. They couldn't outrun the storm, but maybe they could outsmart it. As they reached a rocky outcrop, the young man turned to the others. "Get down," he yelled. They huddled together, the storm raging around them. The young man clenched his fists, his eyes burning with determination. They were survivors, but they were also fighters. And they wouldn't go down without a fight. The sandstorm subsided, leaving the humans battered but alive. As they caught their breath, the ground beneath them began to shift. The desert faded away, replaced by a sterile, metallic room. The walls were lined with holographic panels, and the air was filled with the hum of machinery. The young man stood up, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't real," he said. "It's another test." Before anyone could respond, a holographic figure appeared in the center of the room. It was the instructor, his reptilian features twisted into a smirk. "Congratulations," he said. "You've made it this far. But now comes the true test, the Deathworld simulator." The humans exchanged uneasy glances. The young man stepped forward, his voice steady. "What's the point of all this?" he demanded. "Why are you testing us?" The instructor's smirk widened. "The Empire needs the strongest species," he said. "Those who can survive anything. And you have proven yourselves worthy of the final challenge." Before the young man could respond, the room began to change. The walls dissolved, replaced by a series of deadly environments, a volcanic wasteland, a toxic swamp, a barren asteroid field. The instructor's voice echoed around them. "Survive these worlds, and you will have proven your worth. Fail, and you will be eliminated." The humans braced themselves as the first environment materialized, a volcanic wasteland, the ground cracked and glowing with molten lava. The heat was unbearable, and the air was thick with ash. The young man turned to the group. "Stick together," he said. "We've faced worse. We can do this." They moved cautiously, their every step measured. The ground was unstable, and the heat threatened to overwhelm them. But they pressed on, using their wits and teamwork to navigate the treacherous terrain. As they reached the edge of the volcanic wasteland, the environment shifted again, plunging them into a toxic swamp. The air was thick with poisonous gas, and the water was teeming with deadly creatures. The woman with the scarred arm pulled a piece of cloth from her jacket and tied it around her face. "We need to move quickly," she said. "This air will kill us if we stay too long." The group moved through the swamp, their movements quick and deliberate. They avoided the creatures and found a path through the toxic gas, their determination unwavering. As they emerged from the swamp, the environment shifted once more, this time to a barren asteroid field. The humans found themselves floating in zero gravity, surrounded by jagged rocks and debris. The young man grabbed onto a nearby asteroid, his heart racing. "We need to find a way out of here," he said. "But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and we're done for." They navigated the asteroid field, using the rocks to propel themselves forward. The young man's mind raced as he tried to figure out the Empire's endgame. Why were they being put through these tests? What did the Empire really want? As they reached the edge of the asteroid field, the environment shifted one final time, returning them to the sterile, metallic room. The instructor's hologram reappeared, his smirk replaced by a look of grudging respect. "You have survived the Deathworld simulator," he said. "You are stronger than we anticipated. But the test is not over." Before the humans could react, the room began to shake. The walls dissolved, revealing a massive chamber filled with other species that had also survived the simulator. They looked battered and exhausted, but their eyes burned with determination. The young man realized the truth. The Empire wasn't just testing them, it was pitting them against each other. It was trying to find the strongest species, not to teach them, but to control them. As the other species began to move, the young man turned to his group. "We need to stick together," he said. "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about freedom." The humans nodded, their resolve stronger than ever. They had survived the jungle, the frozen wasteland, the desert, and the Deathworld simulator. But now, they faced their greatest challenge yet, the Empire itself. The massive chamber was filled with tension as the various species eyed each other warily. The young man stood at the center of his group, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't fight everyone, there were too many of them, and they were all desperate to survive. But he also knew they couldn't let the Empire win. As the other species began to move, the young man raised his hands. "Wait," he shouted. "We don't have to fight each other. The Empire is using us. They're pitting us against each other so they can control us." The chamber fell silent as the other species turned to look at him. Some of them seemed skeptical, but others nodded in agreement. They had all been through the same tests, the same challenges. They knew something was wrong. Before anyone could respond, a voice crackled in the young man's ear, the same voice he had heard before. "You're right," the voice said. "But you need proof. Look to the walls." The young man glanced around the chamber, his eyes scanning the walls. He noticed a series of hidden panels, their edges faintly glowing. He motioned to the woman with the scarred arm. "Help me with this," he said. They pried open one of the panels, revealing a control console. The young man hesitated, then pressed a button. A holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a message: "Empire Protocol, identify and enslave the strongest species." The other species crowded around, their eyes wide with shock and anger. The young man turned to them, his voice steady. "The Empire doesn't want to teach us," he said. "They want to control us. But we don't have to let them. We can fight back." The chamber erupted in murmurs as the species began to discuss the revelation. Some were hesitant, but others were ready to join the fight. The young man felt a surge of hope. They weren't alone anymore. As the group prepared to move, the mysterious observer finally revealed themselves. A cloaked figure stepped out of the shadows, their face hidden but their voice familiar. "You've done well," they said. "But the Empire won't let you go without a fight. Follow me." The humans and the other species followed the observer through a hidden passageway, their movements quick and silent. The passageway led to a large, underground chamber filled with weapons and supplies. The observer turned to the group, their voice urgent. "The Empire's forces are on their way," they said. "We need to act fast. Take what you need and prepare for battle." The young man grabbed a weapon, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He turned to the observer. "Who are you?" he asked. The observer hesitated, then pulled back their hood, revealing a face that was both alien and familiar. "I was once like you," they said. "A test subject. But I escaped, and now I fight to free others. Together, we can stop the Empire." The group armed themselves and prepared for the fight. The young man felt a surge of determination. They had survived the jungle, the frozen wasteland, the desert, and the Deathworld simulator. But now, they were fighting for something bigger, their freedom. As the Empire's forces stormed the chamber, the humans and their allies fought back with everything they had. The battle was fierce, but the young man's group had the advantage of unity and determination. They used their survival skills and ingenuity to outwit the Empire's forces, their resolve unwavering. The observer fought alongside them, their movements quick and precise. As the battle raged on, the young man realized that this was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice, for freedom, for the right to live on their own terms. When the dust settled, the Empire's forces were defeated. The chamber was silent, the air thick with the scent of victory and loss. The young man turned to the observer, his eyes filled with gratitude. "What now?" he asked. The observer smiled. "Now, we rebuild," they said. "And we make sure the Empire never does this again." The humans and their allies stood together, their spirits unbroken. They had faced the Empire and won. But the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The battle was over, but the work had just begun. The humans and their allies stood in the aftermath, their bodies weary but their spirits unbroken. The Empire's forces had been defeated, but the scars of their exploitation ran deep. The young man looked around at the group, humans, aliens, and the mysterious observer, all united by a common purpose. The observer stepped forward, their voice calm but filled with determination. "This is only the beginning," they said. "The Empire may be weakened, but they will not give up easily. We must stay united. We must rebuild and prepare for whatever comes next." The young man nodded, his eyes scanning the faces of the group. They had come so far, survived so much. But they had also learned something invaluable: strength wasn't just about physical power or advanced technology. It was about resilience, adaptability, and the will to fight for what was right. As the group began to clean up the chamber and tend to the wounded, the young man approached the observer. "What happens now?" he asked. "How do we make sure the Empire never does this again?" The observer smiled, a hint of pride in their eyes. "We expose them," they said. "We share the truth with the galaxy. We show everyone what they've done and why they must be stopped. And we build a new alliance, one based on trust and cooperation, not fear and control." The young man nodded, his resolve stronger than ever. He turned to the group and raised his voice. "We've survived the impossible," he said. "We've faced the Empire and won. But this isn't just about us. It's about everyone who's been exploited, everyone who's suffered under their rule. We have a responsibility to fight for them, too." The group cheered, their voices echoing through the chamber. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready. They had proven that they could overcome any challenge, and they would do it again if they had to. Over the next few days, the group worked together to rebuild and prepare. They shared their stories, their skills, and their resources, creating a bond that went beyond species or planets. The young man felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. They weren't just survivors, they were a family. As they prepared to leave the chamber and return to their homes, the observer pulled the young man aside. "You've done something incredible," they said. "You've shown that even the smallest, most underestimated species can change the galaxy. Never forget that." The young man smiled, his heart filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You showed us the way." The observers shook their head. "No," they said. "You found the way yourselves. I just gave you a push. Remember, true strength comes from within." As the group left the chamber and stepped into the light of a new day, the young man felt a surge of hope. They had faced the Empire and won, but more than that, they had proven that unity and resilience were the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The story of the Deathworlders spread quickly, inspiring others to stand up against the Empire and fight for their freedom. The humans became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. And as the young man looked out at the horizon, he knew that their journey was far from over. But he also knew that they would face whatever came next together, as a united front. Because true strength wasn't just about surviving, it was about standing together, no matter what.